The real loser in last night's by-elections is the British public. People were asked to choose between a party that has lied to them for years, a party that refuses to tell them what their policies are, a party led by a bloke who is currently missing, and a party that is promising to do a load of stuff that the civil service and left-wing media will absolutely hammer them for. And what did most people do? Well, they stayed at home, didn't they? The turnout in Kingswood was 37.1%, so 63% of people decided they would sit on their hands at home. The turnout in 2019 was 71.5%, by the way. In 2019, Labour actually got 5,000 more votes than they did last night there and lost the seat. This is not Tony Blair in 1997, everybody. Calm down. The turnout in Wellingborough was 38%, so 62% of people decided they'd rather walk their dog and watch Netflix than exercise their democratic right. The turnout in 2019, if anyone cares, was 64%. There is nowhere near enough pressure on Lib Dem leader Ed Davey. Where is Ed? Has anyone seen him? If you've seen Ed Davey, can you call the missing persons hotline, please? He was last seen running away from a post office. Ed, whatever you've done, just come home. People love you. Well, I mean, not the voters, obviously. Last night, the Liberal Democrats lost their deposit in both seats. They got 861 votes in Kingswood. For a bit of context, Nick the Flying Brick of the Monster Raving Loony Party got 217 votes in the Wellingborough seat. His manifesto included reducing hospital waiting times by typing them in smaller font and replacing Downing Street with a hair salon called Government Cuts. Rishi Sunak responded to getting the kind of spanking that George Osborne probably enjoys with this ridiculous statement.
Midterm by-elections are always difficult for incumbent governments, and the circumstances of these by-elections were, of course, particularly challenging.
Well, it's not the midterms, it's election year, and it's particularly challenging because of you, Rishi. You're not doing anything the people want. You're banning smoking and increasing A-levels. Keir Starmer said this.
Understandably, we're very pleased with those results. These were huge swings to Labour. The Wellingborough one was the second biggest swing in a by-election since the Second World War.
Well, they lost 5,000 votes in Kingswood and gained around 100 votes in Wellingborough. Asking people to go out and vote for you without doing them the common courtesy of telling them what it is they're voting for is rude, pathetic and weak. And the plan that, well, people are just so sick of how awful the Tories have been, only works if you aren't awful as well, which Labour have been recently. Like I said, the British public are the biggest losers in all of this. Oh, and just to clarify, there is no evidence that George Osborne enjoys a spanking. He probably really resents it. Let's get the thoughts of my panel now. We have top political correspondent at The Spectator, James Heal. I've got entrepreneur and social commentator Joanna Jarju and editor of Spiked. It's Tom Slater. Tom, I won't ask you anything about George Osborne. Look, are our political class now just completely out of touch when it comes to the British public?
Oh, absolutely. But 'twas ever thus, really. I think there was this very brief period where British party politics was interesting because we had the Brexit vote and they knew that they had to respond. The Tory party in particular realised that it couldn't just be this old party of the establishment anymore. It had to reach out to these working class communities. What I regret is the fact that that period of things being interesting in which voters who've been forgotten for a long time were kind of centred in a lot of our debates. That's kind of over now. They've just gone back to their sort of factory reset.
Yeah.
And that's really
James,
depressing to me.
Ed Davey's got to go, hasn't he?
Well, I don't think this is going to be the thing that forces him out, Patrick, because if he can survive the post office scandal, he could probably survive losing his deposits a couple of times. I think the Lib Dems really are sort of the mercurial striker of British politics. Sometimes they have a great day, other times they don't even show up. Last night they didn't show up at all, but I think they'll be happy because, you know, frankly, if you're a Lib Dem, you're happy to come third in life, and that's what they're aiming for at this general election. Oh,
well, I mean, yes, I suppose Lib Dems everywhere would deny that, but they're maybe knitting their own socks and putting them in their sandals as we speak, so we can't go to any of them for comment on that. Joanna, you know, when you look at this now, the Labour Party cannot just stand on a ticket, can they, of, well, you know, hey, the Tories are rubbish.
I think that actually that will probably serve them well at the moment, and I think that they can. I think that in terms of just how people relate to politics, I think Labour are obviously a lot more trusted, even in terms of some of their politics going after COVID fraud. We know that everything with the Conservative Party and their VIP lanes when it comes to PPE, clearly they have a better standard in terms of morality than the Conservative Party overall.
Yeah, I mean, Tom, when you look at it, the Labour Party lost 5,000 votes in Kingswood and still somehow won. And I think they only gained about 150 votes, I think it was, in Wellingborough. I mean, this is not a stonking victory. I mean, the reality is that people are sitting on their hands at home, aren't they?
Absolutely. I mean, Keir Starmer's success so far is based entirely on the collapse of the Tory party. The Tory party looks kind of like a corpse, and he's kind of feasting upon it, really. There's nothing positive. There's no energy. Like, people constantly make the 1997 comparisons. It is fundamentally different to that. I mean, I have all kinds of problems with New Labour, incidentally, but it's still the fact that at least there you had a kind of sense of this being a change. It was something that the country was waiting for. People were energised by it. You actually had a showman in the form of Tony Blair, whereas Keir Starmer is not a man who oozes charisma, if we're honest about it. So it's a fundamentally different proposition, and also that's why I think the election's going to be incredibly negative, because people will probably deliver a Labour government, but it won't be out of any enthusiasm, out of any desire for change. It'll just be, we're fed up with this.
And then Keir Starmer's going to have to actually deal with the problems that are facing Britain, which he's not had to do. I mean, you did mention COVID, and I shudder to think what would have happened if Jeremy Corbyn or whoever was in charge.
No, but let's be real. Some of the problems that Keir Starmer actually has to deal with now have been created by this Tory government over the last 14 years. Well, just look at the economy. I think, we've talked about U-turns before. The reasons for some of these U-turns is because of the state of the economy that the Conservatives have left us in. So I think that it's going to be very hard, obviously, for Keir Starmer to be that ambitious. Obviously, he wants to be, and there are things that he's put in place before that he's had to dial back on a bit because of the economy. So I don't want any big promises that aren't actually going to be delivered.
And of course, 25 years ago, we had a very growing economy under the John Major and the Conservatives at the time. We don't have that now. And of course, the New Labour years was sustained to some extent by having kind of ways to spend on different bits of the New Labour voting coalition. We don't have that now. So Keir Starmer's going to have a really tough battle keeping his troops in line after the next election. If he's going to have to spend money on all these different people, he has none of that left.
Can I just ask, how significant do you think the rise of Reform is? So they basically matched their polling last night. Nigel Farage is showing quite a bit of leg when it comes to coming back. I think if the Tories have got any sense, what they'll do is they'll wait for a November election and make him choose between going out there with the Donald or getting battered by the elements somewhere in Workington. and we don't know which one he's going to do we? But how serious is Reform?
I know which one I choose. Yeah, I think Reform is a serious problem for the Conservatives. It's not a serious problem for Labour so much because they're not taking many votes from them. They're not probably going to win any seats come the general. But even if the Reform get 8%, and of course they got 10 and 13% in the two by-elections last night, 8% is enough to cost the Tories 30 seats. That could be the difference between a bad night and an abysmal night.
Well, and from what I've heard from very well-placed sources, actually, the Conservative Party have been wargaming what it looks like when it comes to if Nigel Farage is leading Reform or not. And they are anticipating that if Nigel Farage decides to come back, then he just gets about 2 million more votes overnight. So, I mean, that is a concern, isn't it?
No, it is a concern. And obviously the biggest difference now is that in 2019, when it was the Brexit Party, they were kind of avoiding the seats that the Conservatives probably would have won. So now they're an actual contender and can really squeeze them out.
This line that Sunak's pushing, I've had a pop at Keir Starmer there and said, "Oh, look, your policy is just we're not the Tories." But to be fair, Rishi Sunak is really dining out on the idea now, if you vote for Reform, you'll get a Labour government. I mean, neither party there is actually doing anything to actively try to convince people to vote for them, are they? Is there any truth, though, that if people go out and vote for Reform, what they are doing is just saying, here you go, Keir Starmer, there's Downing Street, have it?
I mean, technically speaking, of course, there will be seats in which the Reform vote will cost the Conservatives that seat because Labour will sneak through the middle. But how long can you just tell people, you can vote for us and we won't do anything that you wanted us to do, but you've just got to come back for your dinner at every election anyway? It's not going to work anymore. And I think it's really interesting, some of the rhetoric that's coming from Reform, whether they'll stick with it or not. But there's talk on the right of the Tory party of we need to do away with the Tory party. None of this, we're a pressure valve on the Tory party, we're there to get them to nick our policies. People have had enough with the Conservative Party, and you can understand why, because they've said one thing and done another basically the entire time they've been in government.
Not particularly Conservative,
well, the key thing for Reform really is what do they stand for, in the sense that often Richard Tice will talk about, say, net zero or COVID vaccines or, it jumps around a lot. Basically, UKIP had one thing, which was getting Britain out of the EU, and they achieved that, and they was able to make a single-issue cause. And that's what Reform are really lacking. They need to pick up and run with one thing, and then it can really hurt the Conservatives.
I suppose the argument against that, though, would be that actually now there's no ceiling, because if you are putting something together that looks dangerously like it might resemble a manifesto, then people can actually go and vote for a multitude of different things. And maybe, so you might end up with someone who isn't overly bothered about stopping the boats, but definitely loves their policy on net zero, as opposed to it just being about leaving the EU. My concern, and it's a question for you, this, James, is if Reform did get in or get to do any of the things that they wanted to do, they're going to get whopping great big pressure from the civil service and for people in left-wing media as well. Turning a boat back might involve some people dying in the Channel. And when I've put this to Richard Tice, are you going to be able to front up to that? Well, he said he would, but, I mean, do you believe this?
I think any centre-right government, right-wing government that comes in needs to have a proper plan. And I think that too often the Tories have jumped on easy solutions, not done the fundamental hard thinking that Thatcher did in the 70s and 80s to actually address the underlying issues here. And until we have a serious conversation about that, we're not going to actually deal with the big problems facing Britain.
OK.
I think especially when it comes to migrants, if you were to look at a reforms plan on a granular level, you would probably find that a lot of it is fantasy, and they should probably take example of what the Conservative government have been through recently in terms of just the battles with the courts. So it's very
well, they'd
easy
ignore
to have
it.
this
Is what
headline
they say.
policy.
I mean, no, that's not quite true actually. But what they are saying that there's a certain bit of maritime law that would allow them to do it, and also they would just have the balls to do everything that they could do. I mean,
Key thing is they
quite
say.
like the idea of
There's
having
a lot of things that politicians say, but when you actually get into the nitty-gritty, can they pull it?
Would you ever vote for Farage?
I've voted for the Brexit Party previously, but on reform are a bit of an unknown quantity at this point. Where they're going to fall and how they're going to, what policies they're going to present. I'll wait.
I'll have a drink with Nigel, but I say this is that you're not going to get a party of 650 Nigels. You're going to get, if you look at Reform, if you look at Brexit Party, you look at UKIP. There's always a lot of different characters, and not everyone, for better or worse, is like Nigel Farage.